Namaste, Jai Shri Krishna.
Namaste, Jai Shri Krishna, everybody. I just wanted to recap. You remember the last time we finished chapter 1, where Arjun was speaking and explaining to Shri Krishna how he felt. And he went from being confused as to why this war should be fought, and he went from confused to then being completely grief-stricken, and he ended by laying his weapons down, saying that he was not going to fight. So now we're carrying on with chapter 2. Now, before we actually start on the first verse of chapter 2, this is something we need to explain, which is going to occur throughout the Gita. We're going to continue to use the word Bhagavan and Paramatma. And although the Gita says Bhagavana Uvacha, and it's often translated as God said or the Supreme Lord spoke, these are concepts that are absent in Sanatana Dharma, loosely called Hinduism. In other words, the words God, Supreme Lord, have a connotation of a being, perhaps in a white beard, a white robe, sitting in a place, a location called heaven. We have no such concept. So Jiniji will explain the meaning of the word Param.
So, in Sanskrit, we call Param Miyate, which is the extreme or the extreme level of the spirituality. So, yeah, it is Param Miyate.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is to continue to use the words Bhagavan and the Paramatma, and we will leave Sri Krishna to explain over the next 17 chapters who is he, what are we, and what is our relationship to each other and to the Paramatma. And this itself will explain what the words Bhagavan and Paramatma mean. So let's start with verse 1, which Jiniji will recite for us.
Yeah. Chapter 2, verse 1. Sanjaya Uvacha Tam Tatha Krupaya Ashrupurna Kulekshanam Vishidantamidam Vakyam Uvacha Madhusudanaha. Now Sanjay says, Tam Tatha Krupaya Avishtam. So the person, Tam means is Arjun. Krupaya Avishtam. He says he's the pity. Avishtam Ashrupurna Kuleksham. He was the full of tears and who was overwhelmed. Vishidantam idam vakyam, with full of sorrow, he said these words to Madhusudanaha. Madhusudana, who has killed Madhu, the name of demon Madhu, who has killed it. And Madhusudana means Bhagavan Sri Krishna. So this sentence Arjun say to Krishna.
So translating it into English, remember this is Sanjay speaking, and we remember Sanjay was the charioteer of Dhritarashtra the king, who was the father of Duryodhana. So Sanjay is now speaking, saying, seeing Arjun overwhelmed with pity, his mind grief-stricken, and his eyes full of tears, Sri Krishna spoke the following words. You remember we just said in the first chapter, we saw how grief-stricken Arjun was. He was overcome by compassion. He's lost his balance. And he's so much lost his balance that his eyes are now even filled with tears. He can't bear the situation. With the next verse, Sri Krishna starts to speak, although he's not yet teaching. So let's go on to the second verse.
Now, Bhagavan is saying, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Kutastva Kashmalamidam Vishame Samupasthitam Anaryajustam Aswargyam Akirti Karamarjuna. Now Bhagavan says Kutastva, from where? Idam Kashmalam, this delusion. Bhagavan says from where this delusion has come. Vishame Samupasthitam, in this situation, in inappropriate situation. Bhagavan says that where this delusion has come. And now he says, how this delusion is. He says, Anarya Justam. He says, it is not followed by any grade, or which we call Arya. Aswargyam, which cannot lead you to, according to this, Swargya means, which cannot lead you towards Swarga, which is heaven. Akirtikaram, it says it cannot lead you or it cannot give you the fame. So where this delusion has come in this situation, which is in. So this is what Bhagavan is asking question to now Arjuna.
So Bhagavan said, Arjun, how has this delusion, which is a wrong thought, come to you in this situation? It is not befitting in an honorable person. It does not lead to the higher abodes, but to disgrace. Now, this verse is a lot packed into it, so let's go step by step. Now, we can see from the very first sentence, how has this delusion or wrong thought come to you in this situation? In other words, on a battlefield, you're literally about to fight a battle, and you're chickening out. So we can see that Sri Krishna is not at all sympathetic to Arjuna. And being one never to tell an untruth, he does not pretend to be sympathetic. He tells Arjuna quite bluntly that he is deluded. And he points out it's hardly appropriate for a soldier, literally at the start of a battle, to allow himself to get into this state of mind when it's such a critical juncture. Now, Arjuna has always been considered to be a person of great honor, nobility. Remember, he was a prince, and his character is very noble. We saw that throughout the Mahabharata. We saw that in the first chapter. And Sri Krishna is therefore trying to jolt Arjuna out of this state by telling him that his behavior does not show any honor. Such behavior, he points out, will not lead to spiritual advancement or development. It will not lead to progress, but eventually to disgrace. And that's so even today, if we think about it. A deserter in the military, any military, anywhere in the world, is never given an honorable discharge. One can be a conscientious objector. That's perfectly acceptable. But that has to be well before a war begins. One doesn't literally sit on a battlefield and then say, oh, I'm a conscientious objector. I'm now going to go. I can't do this. So in other words, you can't turn conscientious objector literally on the battlefield, which is what Arjuna is effectively doing. So in that situation, one is not a conscientious objector, one is a deserter, and one gets a dishonorable discharge. But then let's also examine Sri Krishna's word, kashmalam. In this context, we can say it means an impure thought. Right? It's inappropriate, or a delusion. But so now let's examine what exactly is a delusion. Why is Sri Krishna using this word? Now in psychiatry, delusion is defined as a belief that is clearly false. So that's number one, clearly false. Number two, indicates an abnormality in the affected person's content of thought. Then the false belief, so third item, that false belief isn't accounted for by the person's cultural or religious background, or that person's level of intelligence. So it has to meet four things. The key feature of a delusion is the degree to which the person is convinced that what they believe is true. A person with a delusion will hold firmly to the belief regardless of any evidence to the contrary. It's not the same as an overvalued idea. An idea we like, we value it very highly. There may be unreasonable ideas, but the difference is the affected person, the one who holds such an idea, still does have some doubt about its validity or truthfulness. In the case of a delusion, a person is completely convinced that the delusion is real. And the reference to that paper we will give at the bottom. It's Understanding Delusions, if you want to look it up, by Chandrakiran Suprakash Chaudhary. Now I want to look at the definition in the context of what Sri Krishna has said. Let's tie that psychiatric definition of delusion to what Sri Krishna has said. He says a belief that indicates an abnormality. In other words, it is inappropriate, Bhagavan says. Then it says such a thought is also not accounted for by the person's cultural or religious background or his or her level of intelligence. So Bhagavan is saying it does not accord with Arjuna's background. What is Arjuna? He's a warrior. He comes, it does not have anything to do with his cultural or religious background or ethical background. It does not accord with Arjuna's level of intelligence. So basically, it fails all these tests, and that's why he said it's a delusion. Furthermore, what does psychiatry say? That a person with delusion will hold firmly to the belief, regardless of any evidence to the contrary. And that's precisely what Arjuna is doing. He was totally convinced of the truth of his position. So now let's think about it. Arjuna is displaying the classic symptoms of a deluded person as defined by 21st century psychiatry. So Vedavyas is describing the classic deluded person and all the symptoms as we now know from 21st century psychiatry, but with no access to any such research or information. So again, the reader can judge for himself or herself, is this actually an epic, or did these events actually occur? We would suggest they actually occurred, and that is why Vedavyas is able to describe the symptoms so accurately. Bhagavan then proceeds to say, this type of position of a deserter only befits an uncultured or unrefined person. That's the translation of anarya. Now, according to a study published by US Army Research Institute, Special Report 51, August 2002, their findings were that deserters are somewhat different from other soldiers, i.e., they tend to be less educated, lower aptitude, to be from broken homes, and to have engaged in delinquent behavior. And the reference, again, if you want to look it up, is US Army Research Institute for the Behavioral and Social Scientists. And we'll give you the link to it. So Bhagavan again says it befits an unrefined or uncultured person. Well, obviously a person who's unfortunate enough to have a low level of education, lower aptitude, lower skills, from a broken home, etc., will have less refinement, culture, and stability than someone like Arjuna. That's why Bhagavan says it's not appropriate for you, for Arjuna. Obviously, it follows that taking such a position or having such inappropriate thinking is not going to lead to spiritual advancement, as Bhagavan says. It's only going to lead to disgrace, as he puts it. Essentially, Bhagavan is saying, let's look at what he's actually saying, is that the morality of an issue, the rights and wrongs of an issue, are more important than any relationship, even a personal relationship. And what was Arjuna worried about? It's his personal relationship. He could not bear the thought that he was going to have to fight Bhishma, his grandfather, and Drona, his teacher, his guru. We can also see how Bhagavan looked and felt about Arjuna's behavior by the fact that he calls him simply Arjuna. There is no term of endearment such as Parth, Kanteya, any of these which will come as we progress through the Gita, but right now it's just Arjuna. So we can see that Sri Krishna did not mince his words. So we'll go on to verse 3.
Bhagavan says now again, Klebyam masmagamah partha naitatvayupapadyate kshudram hridaya daurbalyam tyaktvotishtha parantapa. Now this is very strong word what Bhagavan is saying. He says, Klebyam masmagama, the weakness of unmanliness. He says, magama. Don't go into that. He says, Hey Partha, the son of Prutha, naitatvayupapadyate. It doesn't fit. It is not the right thing for you. He said, Kshudram hriday daurbalyam. Kshudram. Kshudram means petty. Hriday daurbalyam. He says, the weakness of your, whatever the hriday is heart. He said, leave that, and tyaktva means leave it. Uttishtha parantapa. Now get up and to fight. So Bhagavan now, actually this is the first he asked in the previous word, he says, from where you get this situation. Now in this he says that, now get up to fight. So tyaktva uttishtha. Leave these weakness and get. So this is the.
He says, O Parth, it does not befit you to yield to this cowardice. Give up such petty weakness of heart and arise or vanquisher of inner enemies. That was Arjun's name too. One who can tolerate extreme tapasya. Now, Jiniti will explain that this word, klaibyam,
Yeah, so Sanskrit word cleaver. So there are three, as we say, there are three genders which we say the pulling, which is masculine, striling, which is feminine, and which is not masculine or feminine, which called kliba. So which is beyond or neither of these. So that is called kliba. And from there, Bhagavan says klaibyam. So klaibyam means again that the weakness which even men cannot follow or women cannot. So this is what Bhagavan says.
So now we can see Bhagavan softens his words very slightly by calling Arjun Parth, the son of Kunti. So he's reminding Arjun of their relationship. Now we may remember, listeners may remember from chapter 1, that Kunti, that's Arjun's mother, was the sister of Vasudeva, who is Sri Krishna's father. So by using this word, Sri Krishna is reminding Arjun of his love for him. But he still calls Arjun's current state of mind one displaying cowardice, which is a pretty strong word. He's saying you're a coward. Now, what are the features of cowardice? Do they fit Arjun? Why is Bhagavan using such a word? It's a very strong word. Now, Open University in 2014 printed a book by Chris Walsh based on a study of cowardice called Cowardice, A Brief History. And here's a brief summary of some findings, and we'll see why Bhagavan uses his word and why, unfortunately, it does fit Arjun's behavior. The first point is that the allegation of cowardice is a powerful tool in the recruitment and conscription of soldiers. Sri Krishna is obviously trying to jolt Arjun back to his senses for him to carry out his duty. And we'll come to that again when we progress. The second point Chris Walsh, who wrote this book, mentions, cowardice, it says, is an evolutionary response to fear. It's a part of our flight and fight response. When we are faced with something frightening, our natural inclination is to flee. And that's often the most prudent response. Yet, the preservation of society requires that when our group is threatened, we stay and we challenge the danger. We do our duty to others, and we expect that others will do theirs, even if it will not directly benefit us. Why? Because the person in defending his clan, his tribe, his nation might die. Cowardice is an affront to this norm, the norm being that we defend each other. Once again, we can see Arjun was frightened at the thought of killing so many kinsmen. So instead of staying and fighting and preserving society, his sudden inclination is to flee. Let me leave the battlefield. The third point made by the study is it examines the importance of duty in overcoming cowardice. There is an apparent paradox of duty. Duty is represented as a choice. We have a choice whether to do our duty or not. So although duty on the one hand is a compulsory act, its performance is nevertheless supposed to be voluntary. Failure to act as duty requires necessitates severe reprimand that can result in capital punishment. Now, in ancient and very civilized India, there was no question of any capital punishment for anybody refusing to do their duty. It was a true choice. But clearly, Arjun would be derelict in his duty if he failed to fight. This facet is very pointed, we'll find, throughout the Gita, about doing one's duty or the required action, karma, without attachment, without worrying about particular result and without the expectation of a particular result. In other words, to do one's duty, do what is right for the sake of doing what is right. And we'll see this as we progress through the chapters, how Sri Krishna will stress this more and more. The fourth thing the study found was historically, society has shunned those who are found guilty of cowardice. Sri Krishna will come to this aspect in later verses. Fifth, the study then illustrates how prevalent cowardice is outside of military discourse. Violence and cowardice are intimately connected outside of the archetypal war setting. moral cowardice is just as damaging for the individual as it is for society. So Arjuna's position was very damaging, not just to himself, but for society as a whole. Next, Sri Krishna says this does not befit Arjuna. Now, we saw in the previous verse why this was the case, given Arjuna's background, education, intellect, culture. Therefore, Sri Krishna says, please give up this weakness of heart and get up. Now, why does Sri Krishna refers to this as a weakness of the heart rather than of the mind? We will come to this in a later chapter where we explain the science connection between the heart and the mind. There is a very particular reason why we always refer to the heart and why Sri Krishna refers to the heart. He then deliberately addresses Arjuna by one of his epithets, Parantapa, which again Jiniti will now explain.
Yeah, Parantapa, tapa again is great. So tapa means sacrificing, or tapasya, which we call in Sanskrit. Parantapa means who has sacrificed the extreme or the base. So Parantapa word is usually used for the great sages, for monks. So yeah, Parantapa means great sacrifice.
Basically, Sri Krishna is asking Arjuna, how can this kind of weakness come to somebody who can tolerate such hardship because of his past courageous deeds? He could also be asking him to subdue the enemy within him, which is his weakness or cowardice. So now we'll proceed to verse 4.
So now Arjuna is replying. Arjuna uvacha katham bhishmamaham sankhye dronam cha madhusudana ishubhik pratiyotsyami pujarha varisudana. Arjuna says, katham bhishmam aham sankhye. Aham means Bhagavan. Arjuna says, how can I, in this battlefield, Bhishmam Dronam, to Bhishma and the Drona, Bhishma again, his grandfather, Drona is his guru. He says, hey Madhusudana, Ishubhihi pratiyotsyami. Ishubhihi means by arrows. He says, how can I kill them by arrows, or how can I fight with them by arrows? Pujarhau Arisudana. Hey Arisudana. Arisudha means who kills only. So the meaning of word Ari, which is enemies, but the another meaning of word Ari is who are inner enemies. So it says that the enemies, or Madhusudana again, so he is referring Sri Krishna, Sri Bhagavan, he is referring two adjectives. One is Madhusudana, second is Arisudha. So he says these both are my pujarhau, they both are worshipable, they both are to worship. They are so respectable, how can I kill them with arrows? So this is what now Arjuna is asking Bhagavan.
So Arjuna says, O Madhusudan, how can I shoot arrows in battle on men like Bhishma and Dronacharya, who are worthy of my worship, O destroyer of enemies? Now, we're seeing that in Sanskrit, the use of words is very deliberate and pointed. And by again addressing Sri Krishna as Madhusudana, he's reminding Sri Krishna that he's saying, look, you killed demons, including one named Madhu. Not your dear relatives and teachers, not your gurus. Yeah. He then also calls him destroyer of enemies, again reminding him he killed enemies, whereas Bhishma and Drona were not Arjuna's enemies. One was a dear grandfather, and the other was a teacher whose favorite pupil he was. So again, he's asking Sri Krishna, how are you expecting me to do this? But we notice that he names only Bhishma and Drona now. He's not naming any of the other kinsmen. So he's basically saying, look, never mind all the other enemies here, never mind all the other people here on the other side, but of all people, how can I possibly kill these two? Bhishma and Drona are worthy to be revered. How can I send arrows against them? Now, let's examine what Arjuna is feeling and comparing it line by line to what science tells us will happen in this situation by the Harvard Business Review. The article is called, or the research is called, Calming Your Brain During Conflict by Diane Musho Hamilton. It was published 22nd December 2015. We have two amygdala, one on each side of the brain behind the eyes and the optical nerves. It's there. It's a cluster of almond-shaped cells which help define and regulate emotions. They preserve memories and attach those memories to specific emotions. So in other words, every emotion you have may be because of a happy memory or a sad memory, and this organ attaches the memory and labels it, if you like, happy, sad, joyous, whatever. So what happens in a situation like this? First, when we perceive a threat, the amygdala sounds an alarm. It releases a cascade of chemicals in the body. Stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol flow through our system, immediately preparing us for fight or flight. Arjun wanted flight, chapter 1, verse 47. Second, we notice immediate changes like an increased heart rate or sweaty palms. What does Arjun say? The bow Gandiv is slipping from my hand, chapter 1, verse 29. Then our breathing becomes more shallow and rapid as we take in more oxygen, preparing to bolt if we have to. This is part of the flight syndrome. Then the flood of stress hormones create other sensations like a quivering in our solar plexus, limbs, or our voice. Arjun says his limbs are quivering, chapter 1, verse 28. We may also notice heat flush our face, our throat constrict, or the back of our neck tighten and jaw set. Arjun says his skin is burning all over, chapter 1, verse 29. Then the active amygdala also immediately shuts down the neural pathway to our prefrontal cortex, so we become disoriented in a heated conversation. Well, Arjun is having a heated conversation with Sri Krishna, chapter 1, verse 28, and continuing here. Normally, Arjun would never have been so heated or so pedantic with Sri Krishna. Why? Because remember, he worshipped him as a Paramatma himself. But because the neural pathway to his prefrontal cortex here has become shut down, he's disoriented, and he doesn't even realize that what I'm doing is having a heated conversation with a person I revere and worship as a Paramatma himself. In other words, his reverence for Sri Krishna far exceeds his reverence for Bhishma or Drona. And yet here he is having a heated argument with him. Then complex decision-making disappears, as does our access to multiple perspectives. We can see that Arjun is unable to see any perspective other than his own, like what will happen to society if this wrong-minded Duryodhan wins. He's not asked himself that question. He's not capable of it. Then, as our attention narrows, we find ourselves trapped in the one perspective that makes us feel the most safe. I'm right, you're wrong. Now, despite the reverence Arjuna has for Sri Krishna, he has already, without giving any time or thought to his words, already rejected Sri Krishna's views in verses 2 and 3. So he's that disoriented. Now, we leave you, the listeners, to judge how stunningly accurate this description is in a so-called epic of a man whose amygdala has sounded an alarm, according to modern science. And we'll proceed to verse 5.
Verse 5. Guruna hatva hi mahanubhavan shreyo bhuktum bhikshamapi haloke hatvarthakamastu guru nihaiva bhunjiya bhogan rudhira pradigdhan. Now Arjuna is adding, he says, Gurun ahatva hi mahanubhavan. He says, these are my gurus. So now here he is calling gurus in plural, which is in respect. He says, Gurun ahatva hi mahanubhavan. He says they are great experience, they are great the teachers. How can I Sreya bhuktum bhikshamapi haloke? He said it is better for me to beg and eat or just live this life. Sreya, the Sanskrit word Sreya, there are two words in Sanskrit which we call Shreya and Preya. So Preya word is used always which you like to do, And Shreya word is used for which is good for you, which is like Shreya means moksha. So he says, for me, the better is to beg and eat or survive in this life instead of killing them. He says, Hatvartha kamanst guru nihaiva. Why I'm killing? He says, Artha kaman. Just to get this kingdom, he says, Hatva, after killing them, Bhunjiya bhogan rudhira pradigdhan. That he says that what I'm going to enjoy. It says it will be full of blood. The pleasure will be full of blood, which I'm not ready to. So this is what he says, that instead of killing, I should escape. So this
She says it would be better to live in this world by begging than to enjoy life by killing these noble elders who are my teachers. Because remember, it's not just Dronacharya on the other side. There are others like Kripacharya, who also was his guru. If we kill them, the wealth and pleasures we enjoy will be tainted with blood. Blood of whom? The blood of his relatives. A further indication that the Gita records an actual conversation between a warrior and the Paramatma is that this is Arjun speaking a very complex language, and he has just made a grammatical error. Jiniti will explain further in a minute, by using the word ahatva.
Yeah. So so we have, like, as we say that we have Vedic grammar and we have the Laukik grammar. So Laukik means just in general scriptures which is written. So according to Vedic grammar only, this word can be used as ahatva, but not according to Laukik grammar, which is used for general scriptures. So by using this word ahatva, it says that this is beyond the general scripture, and also it is confusion of Arjuna.
But throughout the very complex explanation, in a language which is very precise and complex, Sanskrit scholars like Jiniti will tell you that Sri Krishna has not made a single grammatical error anywhere. Bhagavan obviously will make no mistakes at all, and this is, again, yet another indication that this is an actual conversation going on between a warrior, and that the other person speaking is the Paramatma. Now we can see Arjun's amygdala is in full swing as yet, but we can see the truth contained in the research study above, that as our attention narrows, we find ourselves trapped in the one perspective that makes us feel the most safe. I'm right, you're wrong. So despite the fact that he knows who Sri Krishna is, he's still trapped in the perspective that somehow Sri Krishna could be wrong and he could be right. And he also says that whatever we win and seek to enjoy will be tainted by the blood of the relatives they killed. So verse 6.
न चैतद्विद्मः कतरन्नो गरीयो यद्वा जयेम यदि वा नो जयेयुः यानेव हत्वा न जिजीविषामः तेव स्थिताः प्रमुखे धार्तराष्ट्राः. Now he's going a little beyond. He says, Na etad vidmaha katarannaha gariya. He says, we don't know. Na etad vidmaha. Katarannaha gariya. Which one is better? So he says, which we cannot understand, or we don't understand that which one is better. Yadva jayema yadi vano jayeyu. Either we can win, or if we lose, or if we don't win. Yane vahatva. Yan means he's talking about this. Now he's saying yan means he's saying all from Dhritarashtra's, or he's using word Dhritarashtra. So he says the Kauravas. So Yane Bhatva Najijish Vishama. He says after killing them, all the sons of Dhritarashtra, Najiji Vishama, we don't want to leave, because Tevasthitaha Pramukhe Dhatarashtra. They are the one who are standing from front of us, and after killing them, we don't want to live that life. So he says we don't understand now. So here Arjuna is actually accepting, I don't understand, which we don't know that which one is better. Either we win or we lose.
Well, this is a very strange verse. He says, Arjun says, we do not even know which result of this war is preferable for us, conquering them or being conquered by them. Even after killing them, we will not desire to live. Yet they have taken the side of Dhritarashtra and now stand before us on the battlefield. When he says they have taken the side of Dhritarashtra, of course, he's referring to all the other kings and princes who had sided with Duryodhana and were fighting on Duryodhana's side. Now, in this verse, we can see Arjun's attention is focused purely on the people in front of him. So he's referring only to people on the side of Dhritarashtra, not to many of the others who are on his own side who also could get killed. He's so completely confused at this point, he doesn't even know, he says, whether or not he wishes to win the war, if it's fought. Now, let's put this in a modern context. It would be a bit like somebody on the Allied side saying, I don't know, is it better for us to win this war? Or maybe the Nazis should win it and then they could exterminate everybody. His confusion is that great, that extreme, that he actually thinks it might be better for evil to triumph. Then he makes the statement, after killing them, we will not desire to live. Now, Arjun was wise beyond his time. Let's see why. And let's look at some research published by University of California, San Francisco, 12 December 2016. The research was carried out at the San Francisco Veterans Affairs Medical Center. I'm going to quote from the publication. Killing in war often triggers a moral conflict in veterans that can damage their self-image, relationships, and spirituality. For many of these veterans, some of whom may already suffer from post-traumatic stress, PTSD, the guilt, shame, anger, and isolation they suffer compound psychological trauma related to their war experiences. These emotional scars sometimes last for decades. McGuinn's earlier research, supported by the Veterans Health Research Institute, has linked killing in combat with PTSD, depression, and suicide. So, very relevant study, very relevant to Arjun's very wise words, thousands of years before any such research was carried out. So, Arjun fully understood the consequences of war. And given this research that we know today, it's not surprising that somebody as sensitive and noble as Arjun would foresee the consequences. If one is depressed and suicidal, as the research indicates, it's difficult to see how they're going to enjoy themselves. So his dilemma is that nobody else seems to be able to see the consequences, and they're all standing there, as he says, before us on the battlefield.
So verse 7, he says, Karpanya doshopahatas svabhavah pruchhami tvam dharma sammudha chetaha yachreyasya nishchitam bruhi tanme shishyasteham sadhimam tvam prapannam. So first word he says, Karpanya dosha upahatas svabhavah, the flow of cowardice. He says, Upahatas svabhavah, my nature, my own nature got destroyed. Pruchhami tvam dharma sammudha cheta. He says, I'm confused in dharma, in my duties. Tvam pruchhami, I'm asking you. Now Arjuna is saying, I'm asking you. Yatreyahasya nishchitam bruhi tanme. What is better for us, nishchitam, he said, decide, and tanme bruhi, please tell me. And the last sentence, if you all might have heard that, and it is very popular everywhere, it says, Sishyasteham, I am your student. Sadhimam, the three words, three actually sentences, small sentences, which are very important. The first one he says, Aham te shishya, I am your student. Second, he says, Mam sadhi, he says, guide me. Tvam prapannam, I am yours, I am surrendered. So he says first, so these are actually the sign of the student. He says first you have to accept that you are a student. Bhagavan doesn't say anywhere that I am your guru, but Arjuna is accepting that I am your student. So first he says I am your student. Second is Shadhimam. He says guide me or discipline me. And the Tvam Prapannam is I am surrendered. So this is very famous verse.
So it's Arjuna, of course, still speaking. He says, I am confused about my duty, and I'm besieged with the fault of cowardice. I'm your student, and I'm surrendered to you. Please instruct me for certain what is best for me. So Arjuna now freely admits that he's confused. Remember in verse 4, what was one of the problems? Complex decision making disappears, as does our access to multiple perspectives when our amygdala sound an alarm. But he now also admits that cowardice is a fault. And remember, we quoted the study where it says the preservation of society requires that when our group is threatened, we stay and challenge the danger. We do our duty to others and expect others will do theirs, even if it will not directly benefit us. Obviously, because the person fighting might get killed. Cowardice, it says, is an affront to this norm. So basically, Arjuna is accepting that he's really in no fit condition to make any meaningful decision, and hence describes himself as confused. But this is a critical verse, obviously, in the Gita, because for the first time, Arjuna is asking Sri Krishna to teach him. Teach me, he says, and says that he's surrendered to him, even if he doesn't actually mean that, as we'll see from the very next verse. But it's a very important verse because without this request, we would have had no Gita. So we have Arjuna to thank for those words.
Now he says, Nahi prapashyami mamapanudyat yacchokamuchoshanamindriyanam avapya bhumavasapatnabuddham rajyam suranam apichadipatyam. He says, Nahi prapashyami mama apanudyat. He says that I don't see any great or any good thing in these. Because of that, apanudyat, he says, yat chokam. Shokam is grief. He said, because of the grief, uchchoshanam indriyanam, my senses are drying. Avapya bhumau asapatnamruddham. He says, even though after getting this whole earth, or better than that, rajyam suranam apichadipatyam, even though I get a kingdom of the gods or demigods, which we call devas. He said that also, after getting that also, what is next? So he says, because of this situation, I don't see any better, and my all senses are drying because of grief.
So Arjuna says, having said I'm surrendered and please teach you, one would have thought that he would be quiet and wait for the Paramatma to teach him. But no, he carries straight on. He said, which is quite funny. He says, I can find no means of driving away this anguish that is drying up my senses. Even if I win a prosperous and unrivaled kingdom on the earth, or gain sovereignty like the celestial gods, I will be unable to dispel this grief. And we'll come to the meaning of celestial gods in later chapters. So having said he wants Bhagavan to teach and he surrenders to him, and we can see in the very next sentence he says, I've already made up my mind. So remember we said that the person's unable to see any other perspective, they just stick to their viewpoint, and he still is. It's still, I'm right, you're wrong, even though you is Bhagavan. But Arjuna is still showing his spiritual side, because what he's actively saying to Sri Krishna is that I don't want to kill just to win a kingdom or for material things. He's asking Bhagavan to show him some other reason to fight, a spiritual reason to fight. He says, I'm not going to fight just because it wins me a kingdom. You need to give me some other reason. In this context, there are two studies that are very illuminating, so I'll share them with you. The first study is from Stanford University. It's one of the most famous experiments on what is called confirmation bias. Researchers gathered a group of students with opposite opinions about capital punishment. Half the students were in favor of it, thought it deterred crime. The other half were against it and thought it had no effect on crime. The students were shown two, both fake studies. One supplied data supporting capital punishment on the grounds that it did deter crime. The other study provided data that called into question whether it deterred crime or not. So two opposite studies. Both studies, although fake, were designed to present what were equally compelling statistics on both sides, and obviously the students didn't realize the studies were fake. Now it's interesting that the students who originally supported capital punishment rated the pro-deterrence data highly credible and the anti-deterrence data unconvincing. The students who had originally opposed capital punishment did the reverse. They said, no, the statistics show that we're right to oppose capital punishment. So basically, what did the studies do? At the end of the experiment, the students were once again asked about their views. Those who had started out pro-capital punishment were now even more in favor of it. Those who opposed it were even more hostile. That's why it's called confirmation bias. You already are biased, therefore you're going to prejudge everything and every fact that is put in front of you by what is your view. And that's what's happening with Arjun. His view is that somehow I should not fight. So no matter what fact is presented to him, he's going to say, oh, I shouldn't fight. And he's basically sticking to his conclusion, disregarding any facts, even though it's Bhagwan himself giving it to him. Now let's look at the next verse, because we'll show you I said there are two important studies. I'll come to the second important study in the next verse. Verse 9.
Now Sanjay Uvacha, Sanjay says, Eva muktva rushikesham gudakeshah parantapa nayotsya iti govindam muktva tushnim babhuvaha. So now he says, Evam tva, after saying that, rushikesham gudakeshah. So here he says, now Sanjay is talking to Dhritarashtra. He says, Parantapa, a kingdom, a king, Dhritarashtra. Gudakesha is the name of Arjun. He says, Gudakesha Rushikesham. He says, Gudakesha means Arjun said to Sri Krishna. Now these are the very beautiful words. It says, Gudaka Isha. The meaning of what Gudakesha, he says, who has overcome to their sleep, or who has control, or who can control their sleep. That calls Gudakesha. And Hrishikesha means, Hrishika means Indriyas, means senses. Isha means who has overcome. So he says that Bhagavan himself is who has overcome their senses, and Arjuna who has overcome their sleeping control. So he said, now Arjuna said to Bhagavan, Nayotsya, I'm not going to fight. Iti Govindam tva. He said to Govindam, Govinda again is Krishna, who has or who has control or overcome of their senses, is again Govinda. He says, I'm not going to fight. After saying that to Sri Krishna, to Shrinim Babuvaha. Vyomji said in previous word that he didn't get to silent. Now he said that I'm not going to fight, and then he became silent.
So he becomes silent, not when he's asking Sri Krishna to teach, but when he's already made up his mind, regardless of what Sri Krishna might say, that I'm not going to fight.
Right.
But anyway, let's see. Sanjay said, having thus spoken, Gudakesh, chastiser of enemies, addressed Hrishikesh, Govind, I shall not fight, and became silent. So now he does become silent. Now, Jiniji has already explained the meaning of the word Gudakesh, the one who's overcome sleep. And Sanjay now tells Dhritarashtra that the one who has overcome sleep tells Hrishikesh, the one whose senses are totally in his control, that he will not fight. We can see that effectively, again, he's paying lip service to being surrendered. He's clearly, at this stage, he's not surrendered, although he says he's surrendered. He has actually made up his mind with no input from Bhagavan, other than literally 2 verses, right? Nothing. So this reflects real life. Let's look at a study now by the University of Iceland and New York University. They did it jointly, titled Motivated Close-Mindedness Mediates the Effect of Threat on Political Conservatism. And it's a very interesting study published in Political Psychology. The study shows fear, threat, anxiety decrease cognitive capacity and motivation, which we would expect from previous studies I've quoted. So clearly Arjun's anxiety and fear of what was about to happen had decreased his cognitive capacity. And he was clearly so demotivated that he threw down his weapons. He said, I will not fight. Made up his mind. Then, as a result of the decreased cognitive capacity, what's the second thing that happens? People will seek to curtail open-ended information searches, and they exhibit motivated close-mindedness. So we shut our minds to any further external facts or information that might be able to change our minds. So Arjuna is not actually seeking any information or teaching from Sri Krishna in an open-minded way. He's not even cared to give any thought to what Bhagavan has already said. He's simply reiterated his own conclusion, exactly as the students did on capital punishment, which we looked at. Motivated close-mindedness means we want a certain conclusion to be true. We're desperate for our viewpoint to be accepted as the correct viewpoint. So we basically close our minds to any new information or a different way of looking at something, and we can see Arjuna is doing exactly that. Then the resulting subjective desire for certainty, control, and closure, in turn, is expected to increase the individual's affinity for political conservatism, insofar it says as resistance to change and adherence to authority figures are concerned. Now, Arjuna is exhibiting these very traits in his desire for closure to the problem, even if the closure means giving into evil. He's resistant to change, to the status quo, because he wants to achieve his exit from the battlefield. Otherwise, it means he has to fight the battle, so he doesn't want to change his mind. He continues to view people like Bhishma, Drona, and Kripacharya as authority figures, rather than as people who have taken incorrect decisions and with whom, therefore, he needed to fight. Now, the above study shows how anxiety and fear can make us close our minds. But then there's another study which shows us the risks of becoming close-mindedness, which in turn affects our ability to assess any threat. So we need to take these two studies together. It's a vicious circle that Arjuna has fallen into. This third study is titled The Impact of Close-Mindedness on the Assessment of Threat, an empirical study by Colin Wastel, Nicole Weeks, a couple of other people, basically by Macquarie University in Australia. It was published in an Open Psychology journal. It's a very detailed 18-page report which studies the effect of intelligence analysts being close-minded, having preconceived notions on their capacity to assess a military risk. It's probably the worst situation in which you should be close-minded, and we'll see why. The study fascinatingly analyzes the effects of Israel's intelligence analysts having a closed mind on the capabilities of the Egyptian Air Force. And Bar Joseph and Kruglansky, they set out the effects of this on the Yom Kippur War of 1973. And again, I quote from the study. They examined the situation within which the Israeli intelligence apparatus and speculate that managers displayed high close-mindedness in their management behaviors, which directly impacted upon the advice given to the Israeli government and led to poor preparations on the part of the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, for a war with Egypt. In other words, they had a preconceived notion of the capacity of Egyptian and other fighters. They allowed that to prejudice them against the preparations they could see were made. So the advice they then gave the Israeli government was basically flawed. They note that the Israeli intelligence failure was not the result of lack of information, but an incorrect comprehension of the meaning of the available information. In the same way, Arjuna is exhibiting a closed mind which only wants to justify a conclusion he himself has come to. Exactly the same situation. The Israeli analysts wanted to come to the conclusion, oh, we're not under any threat. These people don't know how to fight a war. They're only Egyptian soldiers. Well, they came to the wrong conclusion. Arjuna, in the same way, wants to justify, by any means, getting off the battlefield. That same closed mind now is unable to assess the threat which is posed to himself, his brothers, his relatives, society as a whole. By using the term Hrishikesh, meaning one who has his mind and senses under complete control, master of these, Sanjay indicates to the blind king that Sri Krishna is totally unperturbed by this turn of events. Bhagavan obviously doesn't need any studies, as we've needed studies, to understand exactly what's going on in Arjun's mind. That's why we call him the Paramatma, the Bhagavan. So verse 10.
So this is beautiful again. It says that Tamuvacha Rushikeshaha Prahasanniva Bharata Senayorubhayor Madhye Vishidantamidam Vacha. So in this verse, as we saw that from chapter 1, Arjuna started crying and saying so many things and complaining. And then in the end, as a warrior, you cannot say this. And he said that I'm not going to fight. After listening this all, why we have to call him Paramatma? This is because of this. He says that Tam uvacha Hrishikesha prahasanniva bharat. So once he said everything to Hrishikesha, to Bhagavan, what Bhagavan is replying? First he is replying with prahasanniva. He says with deeply beautiful smile, laughing. Bhagavan is laughing, and Bhagavan is laughing deeply. He says, Senayor ubhayor madhye vishidantam idam vachaha. Who are in between of this battlefield. Vishidantam. He says, the Arjuna, who is deeply full of sorrow, idam vachaha. So now Bhagavan is replying him with, he is laughing deeply. He is replying Arjuna, who is full of sorrow. So usually who is in full of sorrow, you cannot reply him with laugh or smile. You also make your face like you are in grief. But now Bhagavan is replying with full of laugh and laughing deeply. So this is.
Yeah, it says, O Dhritarashtra, thereafter, in the midst of both the armies, Sri Krishna laughingly spoke the following words to the grief-stricken Arjuna. Now, imagine you're in the middle of a battlefield, you're the commander or you're a colleague or anybody, and one of the major protagonists is whinging, whining, confused, deluded, and just says, oh, I'm not going to fight. Any lesser being would have been frustrated, probably angry in such a situation, with a major participant in the war suddenly declaring on the battlefield, oh, I'm not going to fight. But you all can carry on, but me, I'm getting out of here, right? Under the rules today, they would have threatened Arjuna with a court-martial. But of course, Sri Krishna is not any ordinary being, so he just laughed. He kept his cool, he even laughed. And next week, we will see what Bhagavan actually starts to teach from verse 11. But right now, let's leave it with Sri Krishna's laugh. Thank you so much.
Thank
Jai
you.
Shri Krishna.
Yes.